So today we're going to be making a hand similar to this one. Now when you're first starting out and you're making a character, when you get to the hands, you're probably tempted to start drawing out bits of clay, maybe using the sculpting tools, and you'll probably have a bit of a tough time, especially when it comes to dynameshing, because all the individual fingers that you make sort of like start to fuse together, and it can be quite frustrating. So when it comes to workflows, and the workflow that I found is that I prefer doing the hand as a separate object and then reattaching it later, because we have that option within ZBrush. We can just dynamesh a hand back onto any sort of mannequin, and then with that hand just reuse it on different projects, which is really cool. So in the video I'm going to first start out to show you how you can quite easily reconnect something like a hand back onto another project by separating it and using Dynamesh. And then we're going to go on to how to start from a basic cube and make a hand similar to this. Probably not as much details, but a basic form which you can start applying details to. One of the advantages with the hand, obviously we've got one in front of us which we can keep on referencing, putting up to the screen, but also at the same time they follow a couple of rules like proportion rules, golden ratios, and shapes that we can use to build the hand up with basic shapes. So before starting any task, I always say to people is use lots and lots of references. So when it does come to the references, looking on Pinterest, there's a couple of useful ones, almost like a cheat sheet of the shapes of certain fingers, maybe how they're laid out, and the bone structure underneath. I'm not usually too fussed about the bone structure unless it's surface bone structure like knuckles. That's sometimes useful to know. But these can be really useful in terms of where things are placed and how they're going to be shaped when it comes to things like silhouettes. So we got our main character, and I'm going to move on to a different Z tool. So do remember that when you're saving up here as a tool, it's only going to save the selected one. But as we're working on the main mannequin and a separate hand, you're going to be wanting to use the save project functionality. So there's past videos on that just go over it, but I thought I'd highlight it now just in case you accidentally lose some work. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to start with a cube to make the base of the palm. You can do that by basically right clicking one of these subtools and then selecting a cube 3D. The next thing I'm going to do is go to make polymesh 3D, so it just means that we can sculpt on it. And now it's made a separate Z tool which we can start to work from. So in terms of the arm, or in terms of the hand, I like to start with the palm. Splitting it up into basic shapes, I'm just going to use the gizmo to begin with. So up here I'm going to go to scale, and that's going to bring up our basic gizmo. I'm then going to flatten it to about the width of, or the height of a hand. I'm going to keep it somewhat square because we're going to manipulate this all later. I'm not too fussed for the shape and the accuracy just now. What I will do is turn this into a Dynamesh, so when we start to duplicate this over, we always have the Dynamesh activated. So Dynamesh is just going to redraw geometry on top of it, so we don't have any issues when it comes to actual sculpting. You see there's kind of like a resolution issue there. So once the Dynamesh is activated, and I can see that it's going to be sculpting how I like, I can then start to make basic forms. At this point I'm just going to duplicate the square that we made and then have a wrist shape just for our references. So that's hitting the duplicate button here and using the gizmo to bring it down. I'm going to use the scale gizmo just to bring it in to similar shape of a wrist, maybe thicken it just so it's more indicative of a hand, bring it down and then shape it. So that's almost going to be the anchor for the scale of our hand if we ever need to reference it back. But now we move on to the palm itself. Eventually what's going to happen, or the way we're going to tackle it, is we're going to start by sort of forming this, just had my pen little thing crash, but now it's up and working. So where we left off, what we're going to start off with is sort of like making this palm shape, and then when it comes to our references, you might see that one palm is almost worth one set of fingers, so we're going to draw some more fingers up here. What we will start with is just the middle finger. So swearing at you, we're going to work a lot on that and then duplicate this over a couple of times, and then use the move tool to place it. But if we can try and nail down the palm first and the palm shape, then that's going to lead on to the positions of the rest of the fingers, because we can draw things like knuckles. So there's a couple of useful tips inside of that. I'm just going to clear. So when it comes to the palm, how I would approach it nowadays is be quite confident with using the move brush just to affect silhouettes and sort of sculpt it in. But I appreciate, if you're starting out, making a shape like this might be a bit difficult. So there are useful tips we can do. One is the curves brush. So when you're holding Control and Shift, that's going to bring up the selection rectangle. We can click that and change it to something called Clip Curve. And this is a way of sort of etching out different shapes. If you were going to look at your fingers, you have this natural arc that sort of happens over here, and then your fingers and knuckles are going to rest on them. So your knuckles are going to outline like that. We want to replicate that shape, but we want to replicate it with the tool that we've just highlighted. So holding Control and Shift is going to take us to that clip curve. I'm going to click on the outside canvas and then make a dragging line. I'm going to alt click once, and that's going to insert a bit of a curve pivot. So once I alt click once and then continue dragging, I can make this nice curve shape. So that's a cool way of creating that shape. And then, for example, if I wanted to taper the hand back down onto the wrist, because that's the shape that it naturally has, instead of using the move tool to guess it, which is what I'd probably do, but you can also use the clip curve. So that's just drawing a straight line and then just cutting certain shapes like that. So once that's happened and you've got the basic palm shape, the way I suggest looking at it is obviously look at your references, but you can also take your hand in front of you and then close it like a fist, and then just look at the back of your hand. You want to basically replicate that sort of shape. So with this, I'm going to hold Control and then just draw a little mask off to the side, and then because this is in Dynamesh mode, it's going to recalculate some of the geometry, so it's easy to work with. I'd suggest for this putting a low resolution, because we're not interested in the details. So once I lower the resolution and then draw another square, it's going to give it less geometry. So when I come to do things like smooth, it's taking away all the weird edges. So with the basis of the palm, what I like to do is look at it from the top and then just give it a natural arcing. So the way I'm going to do that is use the move brush and then just with quite a large scale, tap it once and then bring it backwards, and that's going to give us a natural sort of mitten look. You're welcome to put as much detail as you want into this, so try and adhere it. If you imagine you've got your closed fist and now you poke out your thumb, you've obviously got a bit more flesh that's sort of opening up, and then if you try and replicate that in ZBrush, you're going to have a similar shape to this. So once you're happy with the palm and its basic shapes, we can adhere to the silhouettes by just tapping the side with the move brush. We can start to think about moving on to putting the fingers in. I wouldn't spend too much time on this one, because once the fingers are in, everything's going to change, like your perception of things are going to change. So I wouldn't sweat it too much. What can be useful is if we put in a couple of landmarks. So on the palm, we could potentially start to put in knuckles. So when we're doing a knuckle, we've obviously got 4 on this side. I'm just going to use clay tubes, or you can use any sort of brush, maybe a standard or a normal clay. And this is just going to be a visual indicator for where I'm placing things. So I can draw these knuckles. They're not going to be perfectly sculpted like a knuckle, but it's just so I can see where things are going to be placed. Maybe even at this point, when I'm closing my fist, I can see there's a natural arc to the knuckle in between the knuckles, so I can get the move tool and bring these sections down. That's going to help us at a later date when it comes to adding the fingers, because then the transitions are going to flow quite nicely. So I'm pretty happy with that. I know it's all going to change eventually. So the next thing I'm going to move on to is the finger. And so with the finger, I'm going to come to append and then just, it might be tempting to go with a cylinder, but I'd really suggest going with a cube. The fingers are quite squared. They're not like sausage fingers. You've got bones and knuckles that give them a certain shape. So I prefer to start with a square, but you're welcome to use anything. Now I'm going to use the gizmo tool. What I want to aim for, and it's different depending on a lot of factors, but I'm going to roughly go for about the same size as the palm, and then I'm going to position the finger in the center. So it's going to be a middle finger that's swearing at you. That's the best way to think about it. And then I'm going to place it just in line with the palm. And once I've got that, the way I like to do it, I like to align it to the center of the wrist. So if we draw a line all the way down here, it's going to align with the middle finger, and that's quite a nice natural neutral pose when it comes to sculpting. You're more than welcome to change the wrist size. If it's looking out of place, you want to make it look more in line with how you can see it, then you're welcome to do that. So I'm just going to reposition that. With the finger, even here, because we made those landmarks, I can come to my move brush and then just start to align the knuckles to where the fingers are going to be. So something like that, just for the time being. So with the knuckles, I've got my rectangle here. Globally, I'm going to squeeze it just so it isn't as high from the side. And that's the general space that the finger's going to take up. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this over. And now we're going to make each individual bone. So the way I like to do it is the first iteration is basically making half the size of the finger. And this is going to be the base, or the base phalange. About there. The next thing I'm going to do is, because I'm going to duplicate this, what I really want to do is get as much shape and form in here, and then so when it comes to the duplication, I save a bit of time in not having to redo a lot of tasks. So if I come back to my reference sheet, what I can see is that each one of these fingers has an interesting shape. So the first one I'm going to go with is sort of this squared and cylindrical side underneath that arcs down. So we can replicate that in ZBrush. So instead of sculpting with clay or like trims, what we can do is use what we did before, which was the clip curve. So approaching it from the top, so the top of the camera, I'm just going to isolate it by going into solo. I'm trying to replicate that shape. So up here, I'm going to click and hold Shift and Control. And I'm going to click once and then draw a line just to flesh that out. When it's with the fingers, I don't like using symmetry because I think the symmetry gives off a bit too much of a structured, unrealistic look. I like the errors that sort of go into it when you're trying to form it. So holding Control, I'm just going to make this sort of shape. The next one is a little bit more complicated, which is the curve. So from the top, and also I suggest being in orthographic view. So if you have perspective selected, you might run into a bit of issues. So have perspective off for the time being, especially when you're doing clip curve functions. So with the clip curve, I'm going to hold Control Shift, click once around this sort of area, or we'll do it on the other side. Now when it comes to the ends, what I'm going to do is Alt click once, and that's going to create a point for our curve. And then I'm going to Alt click roughly here, just at the end of the curve. And then I'm going to Alt click again to the start of the next curve. And then I'm going to Alt click again at the end of this curve. And then finally make it symmetrical by finishing here and then letting go of my click. So that's going to make an interesting shape. We're going to Dynamesh that just so it gets rid of any holes or any issues. So low resolution, hitting the Dynamesh, and now we've got a basic section or a segment of the finger. So the next thing I want to do is duplicate this again. So I'm going to come to duplicate, then my move functions. The next stage of the finger, what I'm going to do is we're basically halving as we go up. So I'm going to make half the size of this. So roughly about here. you're more than welcome to sort of just reduce it in scale so you know it's going to taper off eventually, but we're going to do all that with the sculpting. So roughly here, and then I'm going to duplicate it again just to finalize the tip of the finger and then reduce that in size ever so slightly. So you're more than welcome to try and make these shapes. That might be helpful, but in terms of time, we're just going to be sculpting back over it, so we're going to recreate these shapes quite easily. So I only focus on using the base as a start. So once we've got all the sections of the finger, what I'm going to do is give them a slight angle so we can understand where the knuckles are going to be and where the joints are. So if I click on one of these, I can move the gizmo by pressing Alt and then just selecting one of these corners. And what I'm going to do is move it to where the joint's going to be located. And then while I let go of Alt, I'm now back to my gizmo. I can click and select these, and that's going to rotate it. I'm going to give it a slight bend just so I can physically see where the knuckles are going to be. And then I'm going to do the same with the top. So once I'm happy with that, I've got all the three sections of the finger. I'm going to come up to the topmost one of the set because we're going to merge them all together. And then I'm going to come down to merge and then just click merge down. So it's going to select the central one. And then I'm going to select it again. That's going to be the final one that we did. So these are all fused. These are all connected together, but they're not necessarily fused. So with the Dynamesh selected, we draw a shape off to the side, and it's going to recalculate that mesh. And now we've got a bit more of a finger shape. So at this point, you're more than welcome to position it. So with the guide, this is our just sort of guidance to make sure it's in proportion with our main palm. I'm going to hide this by clicking this little icon here. I'm just going to hide it because we might need it later. And then I'm going to draw a gizmo out by holding Alt and then Shift. And I'm just going to position it back into place and then make sure it's aligned with the wrist. Now what I want to do is work on this finger individually and give as much anatomy and proportions as I can, but not go too far in depth with the details, because when we Dynamesh things, we tend to lose a bit of detail. So with the finger selected and it's Dynameshed, I'm going to click Solo. That's going to come into the main finger. The first thing I really want to do is just sort out the tip. Here we're going to be using Trim Dynamic, which is a brush. We're going to be using that a lot. And basically what I want to do is basically round this off into a finger shape. So it's just using the Trim Dynamic and aiming for the corners. And what that's going to do is going to get rid of the harsh edges. And you want to go for something that's a bit more natural. With the tip of the finger, what you might want to do is click the corner and then start to drag down quite lightly. Do this multiple times, then you get more of a finger shape. Keep on moving the camera around just so you can see what it looks like from the side. But you can now start to see we're forming the tip of the finger. The next thing I want to do is add a couple of the landmarks. So the ones I like to start with are the knuckles. So if I get the clay brush, what I'm going to do is just do two little eyes either side of where the finger joint is. And we know where the finger joint is because we put that slight gizmo angle here. So I'm going to put those in and then smooth it over. I'm going to do the same to the other side of the knuckles, just these two simple lines, smooth those back over. Now to the opposite of that, what I'm going to do is do the pit of the finger. So with a damn standard brush, which is going to give us like a nice chisel etch, I'm going to aim perfectly from the other side of the knuckle and then just do the inside, a couple of brush strokes like this, leading to about halfway from the side, and then again just smooth that over and then do it to the next knuckle. You're more than welcome to still continue looking at the references. I know there's one down here which indicates sort of how the knuckle and the inside pit are aligned, so it does change when it gets to the base of the hand, but we can sort that out later. So again, just etching the inside of the finger. So I'm happy with that. Now once the knuckles are in, I want to get rid of this sort of harsh edge. I'm going to come back to the Trim Dynamic, so that's how we get rid of our edges. And to make more of a finger shape, what I'm going to do is do very light etches here and do it on the other side. I'm then going to stop before it gets to the knuckle. So I'm only really interested in this area. So with a big brush, I can do it here. I can do it on the same side. Basically what that's doing is it's rounding off the finger, because we obviously started with a cube, but it's still keeping that general rectangular shape. And so I'm going to focus on these edges next. Obviously if it's the tip of the finger, it might be a bit more broad, and as you can see here, a nail is starting to form, and we can use that later maybe as a landmark. So I'm just going to etch it down. Now looking from the side, just from these edits, we're starting to get something that resembles a bit more of a finger. What I would do is, because we started with such a fat cube, I'm going to get the move tool, and basically with a really big brush selection, is just attach the connect to the sides, and with loads of little light clicks on the graphics tablet, just bring it in and try and replicate the silhouette of your finger. So what you're trying to aim for is the edges of the mesh, not necessarily the center, because that's going to affect it in a different way. So aim for the silhouette, aim for the edge, and then start to change how it looks from the side. So we've done the side, we've got rid of the edges. We see that a nail is starting to form, and we can smooth that out however we want, put as much detail. The next part we're going to do is the top of the finger, so how you can see it when you've laid your hand out. What happens with knuckles, this is general with any sort of body type, is joints tend to be quite fat. You know, they've got a lot of ligaments and things, and when you've got straight bone, it tends to be flat, maybe with muscles on top of them. But with the finger, it's very, very tendinous, so the knuckles and anywhere something's going to bend is going to be quite magnified and globular, but then when we get to the bones, it's going to be quite thin and concave. So from the top, what I'm going to do, same process for everything, is just use the brush, the move brush, connect to the side, and then give little arches. So these little shapes that are going to come outwards on the knuckle, but then inwards where it comes to the flat part. So just reshaping that. Everyone has different shapes to the ends of their finger, so continue to look at references. So now we've got the basic shape. You can put curves here, again with the rule of the knuckles. I'm just going to put these in. Pretty happy with the overall shape. What I can do now is get the smooth and destroy all the forms and the details that we put in, just so we've got a light indication of what a finger is going to look like. Maybe sort out the tip, because it doesn't look too much like a finger end. So leading that down. If you want, you can put in a nail. So that's with the dam standard, we can come in and etch a nail in like this just by leading it around. A cool trick I like to use is, if we look at it from the top, I'm just going to use the mask tool and this time change it back to a pen. So while holding control, click this, go to a mask pen. I'm going to draw the shape of a nail very basically by holding control. I'm then going to press control and alt just to rub out this part. Now what I'm going to do is control click off the canvas. That's going to invert the selection, and then with the move gizmo tool I can select that and then hold alt just to move this gizmo out of the way, and I'm going to hold alt and click and drag, and that's basically going to give us a gizmo on the surface of this nail. Now because this is the only part that's been affected, what I can do is start to move this, and what I like to do is just rotate it up ever so slightly. That's going to make the indication of the nail, pull it out and then push it in ever so slightly like that, and then you get an indication for a nail. If you had a bit more resolution, it would look quite nice, but I'm happy with that. So I'm going to get the dam standard and then just draw a very basic line. Probably worth re-dynameshing at this point, maybe a bit more resolution. So with more resolution I can actually draw the indication of a nail like that. So we hope to refine that later, but at least we know sort of where it is. Now at this point, we got the one finger and we got the palm basics. You can duplicate that now, but what I'd probably suggest is put a bit more detail into that, so when you duplicate it you can save on a bit of time. So the bits I would do are, for example, very broad details or medium details, which are, if I get the damn standard, I can etch on the inside and do lots of little strokes, and this is where the finger's going to be bending. Do it same at the top, lots of little etches coming to about halfway. Then with the clay brush is really good for fatty deposits. So on the underneath of the finger, I like to do sort of these cross patterns, so just coming from left to right, and that's going to create like a fatty look, and then we can smooth that over. Same with the inside, so it's taking away that squareness and just giving a bit more of a natural fat look. Maybe even with the tip of the finger with the clay brush, it's just leading down and filling in all those areas. Same with the top of the knuckle, you'll usually have quite a lot of skin around here, so we could come with the Dan standard and indicate where the skin starts to fold. It sometimes buckles at these sections around the knuckle, so I can put those in. For this demo I'm just going to go very lightly, but I would put quite a bit of detail into that. Maybe change the shape of the nail so it's a bit more arched instead of flat and square. So there we go. Now we've got someone who is swearing at you, which is all great. Next, what I'm going to do is start to duplicate these over. So with the finger selected, I'm going to duplicate, and then because we've got our knuckle landmarks, that's a good place to start from. Just taking a gizmo with the Alt and moving it to the bottom, and because I got my duplicated finger, I can start to reposition these in different places. So the middle finger is going to be the longest and the largest, closely followed by I believe it's the ring finger, but I'm just going to do the index finger here. I do like to rotate them and point them inwards. So we're looking for a bit of a target zone, let's say around here. So all the fingers are going to point in this direction. That's just a nice way to do it. We're then going to support it with the arch of the palm, which we sort out later. We can do that. So just positioning it. Also maybe putting a bit of a bend here, just so you can see them from the side. And now I'm just going to finish up the rest of the fingers. So very basically here, what I've tried to achieve is focusing on the finger position and the arches. So something a bit like this, where the knuckles go and where the palm leads. We're going to start using the move tool on pretty much everything to bring them more in line with each other so it flows naturally. So the way I'm going to start that is if I select each finger that I want to change by clicking Alt, I can then come to the move tool. The next thing I want to do is just start to move these around. I'm not too fussed with breaking the proportions really. It's just how the fingers lay out, which is fine. I might even put these ever so slightly close together. So everything's up for edits once this has happened, and then again getting with the palm and trying to align them back to the fingers with the move tool. With the base of the palm, what I sometimes like to do is just get damn standard and then draw a line all the way down here that starts to indicate the tenderness areas, and then I can smooth those out. It's just about creating landmarks so we understand where things are. With the palm of the hand, we've got three basic areas of the hand. So the first is where the finger pads are. With a clay brush, I'm just going to draw this sort of shape. The next one I want to do, so we've got this sort of form just underneath the fingers. The next one I want to do is the thumb, so this sort of like this mass over here. And then the third one is sort of this shape which leads down, and then that's going to be like a more padded area. So you can start to see where the pads or like the paws of the hand are going to be. So I'm just going to draw those in. Next one I'm going to do is just sort out the height. I'm going to bring these in, and just where the knuckles meet the fingers, we're going to have pits over here. So I'm going to use the move tool to basically grab here and then pull them down, just to give the shape of the fingers. I can then continue to come back using a standard brush and then just following that all the way down the palm so it looks a bit more natural, and then again just using the move tool to make it connect nicely. Next what I want to do is create these sort of shapes. I don't want anything like a V. I want them to be nice and curved but not perfectly square, so I'm going to try and achieve that by changing the base and adjusting the fingers. For finger position, I'm going to put in, instead of them having a radiation like this, they're going to have a slight curve inwards. You'll often see that these two fingers are close to each other. Right now they all have the same distance, but if we put them together it's going to look a bit more natural. And then curve these back up like that. Next we're going to make part of the thumb. So in terms of shape, we've got the main hand, which contains all the fingers. Over here we have a bit of a turn off, so if we create this shape for the thumb roughly, there's going to be a natural bend at this point, and then that's going to lead off to the thumb, which is actually quite a long bone that leads off here. And then we're going to be aiming around there, but also in terms of perspective in 3D, we're going to have it lower from the side. So I'll clear this. So it's going to finish off around here. So the best way to do that is I'm going to duplicate the middle finger, bring it to the side. Obviously it's not going to work as a thumb straight away. We do have to make some adjustments. A very sort of dirty adjustment is you can try and reduce it, but it's in size like this, but it's going to look funny and stubby. A better way to do that is use the move tool and then just adjust it to be more like a thumb. It does have a different shape to the main fingers, so maybe a bit more of a lead off here. Obviously a bit more stubby in places, quite long at the base and thick at the base as well. What's worth doing as well is putting a natural bend to it. So the way I like to do the bend is if we solo the thumb, hold control to bring it up to a lasso, and then select just up to the joint. What I can do is invert that by control clicking off the side, coming to the move tool, and then just putting the gizmo roughly where the joint is, and I can start to bend the finger. So I'm just going to do that to the rest of it. So now we've got something that looks a little bit more like a thumb. I'm going to try and adhere to the same sort of rules where the fingertips are pointing inwards. So I'm just going to rotate and angle the thumb so it's pointing inwards like that when we clutch things. Want to position it roughly. I want it to be there, and I'm going to make the palm fill in the rest. So now I can come back to the palm and just almost engulf it back over this finger. So once you've adjusted all the individual bits, which is nice because they're not all connected together. So when we do want to make changes to here, it's not going to stretch out different parts of the entire mesh. So once we're finished with that, I'm going to go to the topmost stack and then use merge down to basically connect them all together. So I'm going to merge all the fingers first by going to merge down, and then I'm going to take the palm up here and then just bring it down with the button just below the fingers. So when I come to the fingers and then press merge down, it's going to connect those all together. Next thing I want to do is, because I'm in Dynamesh, we're going to maybe lose a bit of resolution depending on which resolution we're choosing here. Going to draw off to the side a mask that's going to re-Dynamesh everything together, and now it's just about smoothing things over to fix the transitions. My suggestion is be quite aggressive with the smoothing, so when you do another pass and another iteration, you can start adding varied bits of details, because all the fingers don't look the same. The nails are going to have different shapes, so if you get rid of that now, when you come to reintroduce it, it's going to look a bit more accurate, and then we can sort out just general forms and silhouettes when it comes to it. So I suggest using the clay brush if you want to fill in any areas like this, but the way we've laid it out, there's a bit of a natural transition anyway. When it comes to the webs of the hand, what I suggest doing is, if you get the standard brush, what we're going to do is just draw a little line over here, which is going to be the web. It's going to start at the bottom and then come to each individual finger, and then do the same here. And then on the opposite side, what we can do is etch in with the standard brush and bring it downwards, and that's just going to make the fingers look like they're transitioning back into the hand a bit better. And now it's just about putting in knuckle details and bony landmarks like this. Also thinking about tenderness areas, so these fingers are almost like construction lines. They've got tendons that lead across them, so with a standard brush we can just draw straight lines like this. Doesn't have to be crazy accurate, because when we go back over it later, you can just smooth it out and slowly start to approach something that looks a bit more like a hand. So once you've finished that, we can attach it back onto the main mesh. So moving on to the overall workflow, it's sort of showing a bit at the end at the start just to see how it works. So say that I want to start working on the hand. The first thing I'm going to do with the original mannequin, let's pretend like it's all finished and the hand is one of the last things we're doing. I'm going to get a mask tool by holding Control, and then I'm going to switch this to lasso, so it's by default on a pen. And I'm just going to select the hand. Once that's selected, I can come down to split in the subtools menu, and then I can come to split mask points. That's basically going to separate the two forms into different subtools. I can then hide the hand, and then it looks like we've got a handless mannequin. Next thing I'm going to do is, I've already created this hand, so at the end of today, what you'd have finished, I can come back to my original tool and then down in append, which is basically adding a different Z tool. I can come to append and then just select the arm that I made. So it's probably quite big right now. Let's find it. I'm just going to use the move tool and then hold Alt and then click and drag just to draw out this sort of gizmo. I'm going to bring it down and then position it ever so slightly on the arm. Once you're happy with the basic position, we're just going to do the inverse on this subtool. So if I come to solo, I'm just going to isolate it, and then using the same mask lasso, I'm just going to select the upper forehand and give a bit of wrist just so I can blend it back into the original sculpt. So once that's done, I come down to split mask points, and then I'm going to unsolo it so I can bring everything back. And then I'm going to press this little I to hide the upper forearm. So now we've got the main hand which we want to connect, and that's been prepared in a way. and then we've got our base mesh which we've prepared for the fusing to happen. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the mannequin, and I want to make sure that this is either going to be above or below the hand that I want to merge to. So what you can do is press these little buttons to first select which one you want, and then the little right angle button to put it to the bottom. You could also press Control and up and down to sort of move those. So we're selecting the hand. I could press Control and then press down loads of times, so they are now stacked on top of each other. So the reason we want them stacked on top of each other is because when you go to the mannequin and then we press merge, we have an option for merging down. And basically what that's going to do is going to take this subtool and then merge it down to the one that's below it. So it's important, the hierarchy of your tools. So once I merge down, I might want to just reposition this hand a bit better back into the forearm. I'd also suggest at this point, if you do want to make any changes with like a move brush just to make it fit the wrist a bit better, I'd suggest doing that now. And then when we come to the mannequin and then press merge down, they're going to be connected as one subtool. But the only thing is they're not physically connected as one mesh as you would have with traditional clay. So how we can alleviate that is make sure that we've got Dynamesh selected, maybe up the resolution ever so slightly, and then press Control and then just draw off to the side of the canvas. And then what that's going to do is going to fuse these together. Then there's going to be a little bit of cleanup, but now what you can see is we've got our mannequin, a hand that we did in a different project, and then we've just reattached them together.